The moment my father slid a bank folder across the dinner table, I realized this wasn't about the $30,000 he wanted me to pay. Why was my name already printed on the loan documents? Why did everyone else seem to know what was inside except me? And why did the last page carry my electronic signature when I had never signed anything? My brother smiled and said, "You covered me once. You'll do it again." My father nodded like the decision had already been made. That's when I understood the debt wasn't the biggest lie sitting at that table. If you're watching from outside the US, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Tell me your country and what time it is where you are. And if stories about family boundaries and finding the truth speak to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and follow this journey with me. When I got home that night, I didn't pour myself a glass of wine or call anyone to vent. I locked my apartment door, placed the bank folder on my kitchen table, and stared at it for a long minute before opening it again. Years of working in financial compliance had trained me to do one thing before reacting to anything emotional. Read everything, every page, every date, every signature, every footnote. At first glance, the paperwork looked ordinary. It was a commercial loan modification package from a regional bank. Brandon's construction company was listed as the borrower. The amount connected to the modification was just under $30,000. That was the number my father had announced so confidently over dinner. But something about the package bothered me almost immediately. The page numbers. The packet began with page 7. There was no page 1, no page 2, no explanation. Someone had intentionally handed me an incomplete copy. I scanned each document into my computer before touching another page. Then I enlarged the electronic signature that supposedly belonged to me. To anyone else, it looked perfect. My name, my signature, even the timestamp. But electronic signatures leave trails that handwritten signatures don't. Metadata, verification records, authentication logs. Those details rarely appear in printed copies. If I wanted answers, I needed the bank. The next morning, I called the customer service number listed on the documents. After confirming my identity, the representative transferred me to someone in commercial lending. "Olivia Bennett speaking." "My name is Rachel Duncan," I said. "I'm calling because I received documents listing me as a guarantor for a commercial loan I don't believe I authorized." There was a brief pause. "I'll need to verify your identity before discussing the account." 10 minutes later, after answering security questions and emailing copies of my driver's license, Olivia's tone changed. "Ms. Duncan." "Yes. I can confirm that our records currently list you as a personal guarantor." The words landed like cold water. "I've never signed a guarantee." "I understand your concern. Can you tell me when it was signed? I'm afraid I can't release the full file over the phone." "I work in compliance," I replied carefully. "I'm not asking you to break policy. I'm asking whether the guarantee exists." "It does." My stomach tightened. "Can you at least tell me whether this is connected to the loan modification?" Another pause. "No. No. It predates the modification." I stopped taking notes. "It predates it. Yes. So the $30,000 isn't the original obligation." She immediately caught herself. "I'm sorry. That's all I can disclose without a formal request." I thanked her, ended the call, and sat motionless. That dinner hadn't been about creating a new debt. It had been about convincing me to accept responsibility for something that already existed. Someone had expected me to sign before I started asking questions. Instead of calling my parents, I opened an old contact list and searched for a name I hadn't needed in almost 2 years. Daniel Foster. We'd met during graduate school. While I moved into corporate compliance, he became an attorney specializing in financial fraud and commercial litigation. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel, I need legal advice." "That serious?" I think someone used my identity on a commercial loan. Silence. Come by my office. 2 hours later, I spread every document across his conference table. Daniel didn't interrupt while I explained the dinner, my father's announcement, Brandon's confidence, and Olivia's confirmation that I was already listed as a guarantor. When I finished, he looked at me instead of the paperwork. Has your brother ever had access to your personal information? Years ago. What kind of access? When he started his company, I helped organize some paperwork. Did he ever have copies of your driver's license? Probably. Social security number? Yes. He nodded slowly. Phone. What? Old phone numbers. I frowned. He used one of my old numbers years ago after I upgraded. Why? Daniel made a note, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the signature page toward himself. Don't accuse anyone. I wasn't planning to. Good. Why? Because if this is what I think it is, every conversation from this point forward becomes evidence. I leaned back. So, I just pretend everything is normal. I want you to become the most boring daughter and sister they've ever seen. I almost laughed. I'm serious. No arguments. No threats. No emotional texts. No social media. If they contact you, save everything. What if they ask me to sign something? Don't. What if they pressure me? Smile. His calmness steadied me. I'll request the complete lending file, he continued. If there was electronic authentication, there will be logs. What kind of logs? Time. IP address. Verification method. Sometimes device information. If someone impersonated you, mistakes usually show up somewhere. That afternoon I returned to work, but concentrating became almost impossible. I reviewed shipping compliance reports while my thoughts kept drifting back to my family. The first time Brandon had asked for help, it had sounded temporary. His company had landed a large municipal contract. A supplier demanded immediate payment. He needed cash flow. Dad had called me 3 times in one day. Mom cried. Brandon promised he'd pay me back within 6 months. I wired the money. $38,000. He eventually repaid only a fraction before everyone quietly stopped talking about it. Whenever I asked, Dad reminded me that family wasn't a business transaction. Eventually, I let it go. Now I wondered if that first rescue had taught everyone the wrong lesson. Maybe they hadn't seen generosity. Maybe they'd seen permission. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Olivia. There was no attachment, only a short message. Miss Duncan, our legal department has acknowledged receipt of your request through counsel. I cannot provide documents yet, but I believe you should know one fact. The file associated with your name contains more than one signed document. Please have your attorney contact us as soon as possible. I read the email 3 times. More than one signed document. I slowly closed my laptop. The folder my father had pushed across the dinner table wasn't missing pages by accident. Someone had carefully chosen exactly how much I was supposed to see. And somewhere inside the bank's records there were documents carrying my name that I had never laid eyes on. 3 days passed before anyone in my family acknowledged that I hadn't called back. That alone told me something had changed. Normally, if Dad left a voicemail saying, "Call me when you get this," I'd return it within the hour. If Mom texted that she needed to talk, I'd make time before the end of the day. This time I did exactly what Daniel had advised. Nothing. Not because I wanted to punish them, because I wanted every conversation to happen on their timeline, not mine. By Friday morning, my phone looked like a customer service inbox. Dad had called 5 times. Mom had texted 8. Brandon had left 2 voicemails. Neither voicemail mentioned the loan. Both simply said we needed to clear up a misunderstanding. That phrase bothered me more than an accusation would have. People rarely called fraud a misunderstanding. Around noon, my mother finally sent a message that caught my attention. "Please come by Sunday afternoon. Your father just wants peace, not answers, not honesty, peace." I showed the message to Daniel. He smiled faintly. "They're trying to get you back into a room." "You think they'll ask me to sign something?" "I think they'll ask you to trust them." "What's the difference?" "About $400,000 if my instincts are right." His words lingered in my head all weekend. Sunday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house with nothing more than my purse, my phone, and a small digital recorder Daniel had suggested I carry. Illinois allows one-party consent for recording conversations, which meant I could legally record discussions I was part of. I hoped I'd never need it. But hope wasn't a strategy. Mom opened the front door before I reached the porch. "There you are," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "We've all been worried." Inside, everything looked painfully familiar. The same framed family photos, the same antique clock, the same dining table where Dad had announced I would pay another $30,000 as casually as someone asking for more mashed potatoes. Brandon was already sitting in the living room. He stood and smiled. "There she is." He acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Dad walked in carrying coffee. "I'm glad you came." No one apologized. No one mentioned the folder. Dad sat across from me. "I think we're making this bigger than it needs to be." I folded my hands. "Well, what exactly are we making bigger? The loan?" "What about it?" "You know your brother's business has had a rough couple of years." "I know. And you've always been successful. I've worked hard. We're proud of you." He rarely started conversations with compliments. That was another warning sign. Brandon leaned forward. "Rachel, I know this looks bad." "Which part?" "The paperwork." "What about the paperwork?" He hesitated. "The bank mixes things up sometimes." I kept my expression neutral. "Did they mix up my signature?" His eyes shifted toward Dad for just a fraction of a second. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Compliance work had trained me to notice pauses, glances, and changes in confidence long before people realized they were revealing anything. Dad answered instead. "Let's not get hung up on technicalities." Technicalities. That was an interesting way to describe someone's identity. "I'd like to understand exactly what happened." Brandon sighed dramatically. "The original lender wanted additional guarantees. Around last spring." I looked at him. "Last spring. Yeah." I nodded slowly. "That's strange. Why, I was in Seattle for almost 3 weeks last spring leading an audit. So according to the documents I have, that's when I supposedly signed?" His face tightened. "I don't remember exact dates." "I thought you just told me when it happened." Silence settled over the room. Mom quickly stepped in. "This isn't helping." "No," I said calmly. "Facts usually do." Dad's tone hardened. "You sound like you're interviewing your own family." "I'm asking questions." "You don't trust your brother." "I trust evidence." Brandon laughed once. "You've always been like this." "Like what?" "Everything has to be documented." I smiled politely. "That's literally my job." He rubbed his forehead. "Rachel?" "No, Brandon." "This time I'd like simple answers." "When did I agree to become your guarantor?" "I thought Dad talked to you." "He told me to help. I mean before that." "I assumed." "You assumed what?" "That you'd be okay with it." "Being legally responsible for your business?" He looked toward the kitchen, anywhere but at me. Dad interrupted again. "This family has never kept score." I looked directly at him. I didn't realize asking whether my identity was used without permission counted as keeping score. His jaw tightened. You know what your problem is. I'm sure you're about to tell me. You've started thinking like a lawyer instead of a daughter. The irony almost made me laugh. I haven't hired a lawyer because I stopped being your daughter. I hired one because someone appears to have signed my name. The room fell quiet again. Mom wiped her eyes. I hate seeing this family fall apart. So do I. Then help your brother. I already did. Families help more than once. I've never argued with that. What I'm arguing with is being volunteered without my knowledge. Brandon finally leaned forward. I swear I never meant for it to get this complicated. That sentence stayed with me. Not I never signed your name. Not you aren't responsible. Not this is all a mistake. Only I never meant for it to get this complicated. Daniel had warned me that guilty people often defended consequences before denying actions. I changed direction. How much do you actually owe 30,000? I didn't respond. He shifted in his chair. Maybe a little more. How much more? It depends. On what? The projects. What number Brandon Dad answered before he could. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Why? Because the bank already hinted this isn't just about $30,000. Nobody spoke. Not Brandon, not Mom, not Dad. The silence lasted long enough that even the old grandfather clock seemed louder. Finally, Brandon muttered, Who have you been talking to? I've been asking questions. You went to the bank. Yes. Dad pushed his chair back. I don't appreciate you dragging outsiders into family business. I met his eyes. The moment legal documents carried my name, it stopped being only family business. His face flushed. You have no idea what you've started. I don't think you do either. I stood, thanked Mom for the coffee, and walked toward the front door. No one tried to stop me. No one apologized. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a family member. It was an email notification from Daniel. The subject line read, Official notice of potential personal guarantor liability attached, was a scanned letter the bank had sent directly to his office. Across the top in bold print were words that made my chest tighten. Outstanding exposure exceeds current modification amount. The $30,000 my father kept talking about wasn't the debt. It was only the latest payment someone hoped I would quietly accept. I didn't open the attachment in my car. I waited until I got home, changed into comfortable clothes, made myself a cup of coffee I barely touched, and sat at my dining table with my laptop. That had become my routine whenever something serious landed in my inbox. Create a quiet room. Remove distractions. Read every word. Daniel had already highlighted several sections of the letter. The bank wasn't demanding immediate payment. That wasn't what worried him. What worried him was the language. Potential personal guarantor liability. Not borrower. Not cosigner. Guarantor. In simple terms, if Brandon's company couldn't repay the loan, the bank could pursue the guarantor for whatever remained, depending on the agreement. If my name truly belonged there, my savings, future earnings, and even some personal assets could eventually become targets in a civil collection process. Except I had never agreed to any of it. I called Daniel. I've read the letter. So have I, he said. What stands out to you? They're careful. Exactly. They're not accusing you of owing money. They're notifying you that according to their records, you may already be legally connected to the debt. So we're still proving I never consented. Correct. He paused before continuing. I have also received something else. What? The bank agreed to preserve the electronic authentication records. I straightened in my chair. Already, they moved faster than I expected. When can we review them? Tomorrow morning. The next day, Daniel and I walked into the bank's regional operations office rather than a neighborhood branch. Olivia Bennett met us in the lobby. She looked professional, but noticeably more serious than during our phone call. "Thank you for coming," she said. She led us into a small conference room. A compliance investigator joined us a few minutes later. He introduced himself simply as Mark. "I'm here to explain the authentication records," he said. He placed several printed pages on the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to clarify something. Rachel Duncan has not been found responsible for any wrongdoing. We're reviewing whether the guarantee was properly executed." I appreciated that sentence more than he probably realized. He opened the file. "When an electronic guarantee is signed, several events are recorded." He pointed to a timeline. "The document was opened." Another line. "An authentication code was requested." Another. "The authentication code was successfully entered." Another. "The signature was completed." Another. "The finalized agreement was downloaded." Everything looked organized, professional, almost routine. Until we reached the technical details. Mark turned another page toward us. "This is the originating IP address." Daniel leaned closer. "Can you identify the location? We can identify the internet service provider and approximate source." He slid over another sheet. "The connection originated from a commercial office building." "Which building?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "The address matches the office registered to Duncan Premier Construction." I looked at Brandon's company address. It was unmistakable. His office. Daniel remained calm. "Any evidence Ms. Duncan accessed the document from another location?" Mark shook his head. "None." "What device completed the authentication?" "A desktop computer. I've never signed legal documents from a desktop at Brandon's office." "We understand." I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. Relief because reality was finally beginning to match what I knew. Anger because someone had expected these records never to be examined. Mark continued. "There's another detail." He handed me one more page. "The authentication code was sent by text message. To my phone." He hesitated. "To a phone number associated with the account at the time. I read the number. For a second, it didn't mean anything. Then memory returned. It wasn't my current number. It wasn't even my previous one. It was the number attached to an old family phone plan nearly 6 years earlier. Back then, Brandon had broken his phone while his business was just getting started. I had upgraded mine and given him my old device. The carrier eventually transferred that number to him." I stared at the page. "They sent the verification code there." Mark nodded. "According to our records." Daniel looked at me. "Did you authorize that?" "No." "Did you even know your former number was still connected to anything involving your identity?" I assumed everything had been updated years ago. Mark made another note. "It appears the borrower listed this number as an approved verification contact." I frowned. "Could that happen without my approval?" "It shouldn't." "Shouldn't. Not couldn't. Shouldn't." There was an important difference. Daniel asked the next question. "Do you have the original customer verification form?" "We're looking for it." "Looking. It's not in the electronic file." Something about his tone suggested that bothered him too. After another hour reviewing timestamps and authentication records, we left with copies of everything the bank was legally allowed to release. As we stepped outside, Daniel exhaled slowly. "This is getting stronger." "It doesn't feel that way." "It is. We've shown the signature came from Brandon's office. We've shown the authentication code went to a number you no longer controlled. We've shown the bank may have relied on outdated contact information. But we still don't know who updated that phone number or when." That question followed me all afternoon. Who had told the bank my old number still belonged to me? Brandon, someone at the bank, or someone else in my family? That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. Not because I believed he had forged anything himself, because of how confidently he had announced that I would pay. There hadn't been hesitation. There hadn't been uncertainty. He hadn't asked whether I could help. He'd acted like the obligation already existed, as if he knew something I didn't. I opened an old storage box in my bedroom closet. Inside were folders from years ago, tax returns, insurance documents, phone bills, old contracts. I searched until I found statements from the family cell phone plan before Brandon started his own account. One page immediately caught my eye. Primary account holder Thomas Duncan. Every phone line, including the old number later transferred to Brandon, had originally been under my father's account. I sat perfectly still. Dad hadn't simply known we shared a phone plan years ago. He had managed the entire account. If someone needed old account information, if someone wanted to explain why that number was still associated with me, Dad would have known exactly which number it had been. I wasn't ready to accuse him, not even in my own mind. But for the first time, I stopped asking whether he knew about the loan. I started asking a different question. How much had he known? Before I could organize my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I just got another response from the bank, he said. What now? They located an internal note that wasn't included in the original file. What does it say? He was quiet for a moment. Rachel. What? According to the note, someone contacted the bank before the guarantee was finalized and specifically asked that all future correspondence about the loan be mailed to Brandon's business address instead of yours. My grip tightened around the phone. Did they identify who made the request? They did. I held my breath. It wasn't Brandon. I barely slept. Danielle's last sentence replayed in my mind over and over. It wasn't Brandon. If Brandon hadn't asked the bank to send every piece of correspondence to his office instead of my home then, who had? By 8:30 the next morning, I was sitting across from Daniel again. He slid a printed document across his desk. This is the internal servicing note. I read it twice. The request had been logged by a loan officer after a phone call. Customer requested all guarantor correspondence be redirected to business address on file. Caller identified himself as an authorized family representative. No name, I asked. Daniel shook his head. The employee didn't write one. So we're back where we started. Not exactly. He tapped another paragraph. Look at the date. It was 3 days before the guarantee had supposedly been signed. I looked up. Whoever called already expected my name to be added. Exactly. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. If someone had arranged for my mail to disappear before I had supposedly agreed to guarantee the loan, this hadn't been a desperate last-minute decision. Someone had planned it. My phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. A minute later, she texted, Please don't ignore me. Dad's birthday dinner is Saturday. It would mean everything if you came. I almost declined immediately. Instead, I showed the message to Daniel. What do you think? I think they'll be relaxed. They won't expect me to come. They'll expect you to come because you're Rachel. I laughed quietly. What does that mean? You've spent years proving you'll show up. He wasn't wrong. No matter how frustrated I felt, I had never skipped birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, or hospital visits. My family counted on that consistency. This time I decided to use it. Saturday evening, I drove to my parents' house carrying a neatly wrapped birthday gift for my father. Nothing expensive, just a hardcover history book by one of his favorite authors. Mom greeted me with obvious relief. I knew you'd come. I said I would. She hugged me longer than usual. Inside, Brandon was pouring drinks. Claire stood beside the kitchen island arranging plates. When our eyes met, she smiled politely, but there was something different about her expression. She looked exhausted. Dinner began almost normally. Dad talked about baseball. Mom complained about rising grocery prices. Claire barely spoke. Brandon kept trying to draw me into conversations about work, almost as if he wanted proof that nothing had changed. I answered every question politely. Then dessert arrived. Dad set down his fork. "I've been thinking." I waited. This whole loan situation has gotten blown out of proportion. "I don't think asking questions is blowing anything out of proportion." He sighed. "The bank complicates everything. Maybe. We can fix this ourselves." "How?" He reached into a leather folder beside his chair. My stomach tightened. Another set of documents. I had these prepared. He slid them toward me. "They're simple." I didn't touch them. "What are they?" "Just paperwork confirming you're willing to help Brandon reorganize the debt." "I'd like to read them. They're straightforward." "I still want to read them." He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "We don't need lawyers involved." "I didn't mention lawyers." "No. But you've clearly been talking to one." Brandon leaned forward. "Rachel, if you sign these, everything settles down." "Everything?" "Yes." "What exactly am I signing?" "A payment agreement." I finally picked up the first page. The title immediately caught my attention. Forbearance and Guarantor Acknowledgement. Not a payment plan, not a reimbursement agreement. A guarantor acknowledgement. I looked at Brandon. "You told me this was just a payment agreement." "It basically is." "No." I held up the page. "This document says I acknowledge existing guarantor obligations." Nobody answered. I turned another page, then another. Halfway through, I found the clause Daniel had warned me to watch for. The signer acknowledged responsibility for current and future obligations arising from the underlying commercial credit relationship. Future obligations. Not just existing ones. Future ones. I quietly closed the folder. "I'm not signing this." Dad's expression hardened. "Why?" "Because it says something different from what you told me." "It's legal language." "No. It's a legal obligation." Mom's voice trembled. "Rachel?" I turned toward her. "Did you read these?" She hesitated. "I trusted your father." It wasn't an answer. I looked back at Dad. "Did you read them?" "Of course." "So you knew they weren't simply about $30,000. He didn't respond. Instead, he asked, "Do you want your brother to lose everything?" There it was again. Not the truth, not the paperwork, the guilt. I took a slow breath. "I want everyone to be honest." "We are being honest." I looked directly at Brandon. "Then answer one question." He nodded. "When was the last time you told the bank I had never agreed to guarantee your loan?" His face went completely blank. Dad interrupted. "That's enough." "No." I kept my eyes on Brandon. "When?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember telling the bank I never consented? Or you never told them?" Silence. Claire quietly put down her fork. For the first time all evening, she spoke. "Brandon." Her voice was calm. "You should answer her." He stared at his wife. "Oh, what?" "You should answer. This isn't the time." Claire looked at me, then at Thomas, then at Evelyn. Finally, she said something that changed the atmosphere in the room. "I've asked him that same question." Every head turned toward her. Brandon's face lost its color. "Claire." "No." She shook her head. "I'm tired." "Tired of what?" "Tired of pretending this all happened by accident." The room became perfectly still. Dad stood abruptly. "This discussion is over." "No," Claire said quietly. "It should have started a long time ago." No one moved. No one even reached for a glass of water. Claire slowly stood from her chair. I don't want to do this in front of everyone. She looked directly at me. Rachel, would you meet me tomorrow morning? Brandon's voice rose for the first time. Claire? She ignored him. I have something you need to see. I studied her face. She wasn't angry. She looked defeated, like someone who had spent months carrying a weight she could no longer justify. I nodded once. What time? 10. Where? She pulled a receipt from her purse, wrote the name of a small cafe downtown, and slid it toward me beneath the edge of the table where no one else could easily see. Then she whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. Bring your lawyer if you want. I slipped the receipt into my purse without another word. As I walked toward the front door a few minutes later, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a text. It was an email. The sender's name made me stop in the hallway. Claire Duncan. Subject: I can't keep covering for this. I didn't open Claire's email that night. Not because I wasn't curious. Because I had learned something over the past week. The first version of the truth was rarely the complete one. People revealed more when they believed they still had a chance to explain themselves. I forwarded the email directly to Daniel without reading it. His reply came less than 5 minutes later. Don't respond yet. Meet her first. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early. It sat on a quiet corner overlooking the Chicago River, far enough from downtown traffic that conversations didn't carry. I chose a table against the wall where I could see both entrances. Old habits. Compliance work had taught me that important meetings rarely unfolded the way people imagined. At exactly 10 o'clock, Claire walked in. She looked different from the woman who had hosted family dinners for years. No makeup, dark circles beneath her eyes, a laptop bag hanging from one shoulder instead of the designer purse she usually carried. She spotted me immediately. Thank you for coming. I almost didn't. I know. She ordered black coffee, sat down, and spent several seconds staring at the cup before speaking. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything unless you lied to me. I did. There was no attempt to soften it. I believed Brandon. For how long? Longer than I should have. She reached into her laptop bag and placed a small silver USB drive on the table between us. I've been carrying this around for almost 3 weeks. What is it? Copies. Of what? The emails. My pulse quickened. Between Brandon and the bank? She nodded. And a few between Brandon and your father. I didn't touch the drive. Why are you giving this to me now? Claire looked out the window. Because yesterday was the first time I realized your father still expected you to sign. You didn't know. I knew they wanted your help. You didn't know they planned to make me legally responsible again. She slowly shook her head. I thought they were asking you to lend Brandon money. Like before. Yes. She swallowed hard. I didn't know about the guarantee until I accidentally found those emails. I watched her carefully. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to convince me. She looked like someone finally exhausted by keeping secrets. What changed your mind? She gave a sad smile. Our daughter. I waited. She's 12. I know. Last month she asked me something. Claire's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She asked if families are supposed to lie when money is involved. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. I realized she wasn't asking about school. She was asking about us. Claire took a slow breath. I don't want her growing up believing that's normal. I finally picked up the USB drive. Does Brandon know you have this? No. Does my father? No. Who else knows? No one. Before plugging it into my laptop, I called Daniel. I'm with Claire. Good. She brought something. The USB. You already guessed. I hoped. Can you get here? I'm 10 minutes away. When Daniel arrived, Claire didn't object to his presence. In fact, she looked relieved. We moved to a private meeting room the cafe rented by the hour for business clients. Daniel connected the USB to his laptop. The drive contained dozens of folders, emails, scanned documents, PDF files, meeting notes, everything organized by date. "Did you do this?" Daniel asked. Claire nodded. "I copied everything after Brandon left his office unlocked one evening." "You were worried." "I didn't know what I was worried about." The first folder contained ordinary business correspondence, construction contracts, invoices, supplier disputes, nothing unusual. The second folder was different. The subject lines immediately stood out. Guarantor documentation. Rachel update. Restructure timeline. Daniel opened the oldest email. It was from Brandon to a commercial lending officer. "Rachel won't refuse if Dad talks to her first." Nobody in the room said a word. The next email came 2 days later. "Don't send anything to Rachel's apartment yet. We're handling it as a family." Claire closed her eyes. "I never saw that one before," Daniel continued. Another email. "Once she believes she's only covering $30,000, we can complete the restructuring." I stared at the screen. "We can complete the restructuring." Daniel opened the attached spreadsheet. Columns of numbers filled the monitor. Original commercial loan, equipment financing, outstanding vendor obligations, past due interest, legal fees, projected refinancing. At the bottom was a total, $407,860.42. I felt every bit of color leave my face. The $30,000 Dad had announced over dinner wasn't even 10% of the real exposure. It had never been the debt. It had been the bait. Daniel leaned back. "This changes everything." Claire nodded slowly. "There's more." She pointed toward another folder. "Open the one marked Family Meeting." Inside were scanned handwritten notes. They weren't formal minutes. They looked like planning notes written during conversations. One page contained a sentence circled twice. "Get Rachel to help once more before explaining the full refinance." Another. "Dad believes she'll agree if everyone is together." Another. "Don't mention future liability until paperwork is signed." I couldn't speak. Not because I was surprised anymore, because every instinct I'd fought to ignore over the past week had been right. This hadn't been panic. It hadn't been confusion. It had been strategy. Claire quietly reached across the table. "I don't think your father wanted to hurt you." I looked at her. "I think he convinced himself he was saving Brandon." She paused. "And somewhere along the way, he stopped asking whether he was sacrificing you." Daniel closed the laptop. "We need to preserve everything exactly as it is." "I've already made forensic copies," Claire said. Both of us looked at her. "You did." She nodded. "I work in project administration. I know enough not to change file metadata." Daniel smiled for the first time all morning. "That was very smart." She looked embarrassed. "I wasn't trying to be smart. I was trying to make sure no one could say I edited anything." For the next hour, Daniel documented every file, every timestamp, every folder structure. When he finished, he turned to me. "Rachel." "Yes." "You asked me a week ago whether this was about $30,000. "I remember." "It never was." He pointed at the spreadsheet. "This entire refinancing plan depended on one assumption, which was that you'd keep acting like the daughter they trained you to be." His words hurt because they were true. Not weak, not naive, responsible, reliable, predictable. Every time my family faced a crisis, I'd stepped forward. Eventually, they stopped asking. They simply expected. Claire quietly stood. I should go. I looked at her. What happens now? She gave a tired smile. I honestly don't know. She hesitated before adding one last sentence. But I do know something you still don't. What? She looked directly into my eyes. The bank isn't the only place where your father's been telling people you're financially responsible for Brandon. Claire's last sentence stayed with me long after she walked out of the cafe. The bank isn't the only place where your father's been telling people you're financially responsible for Brandon. I repeated it in my head all the way to Daniel's office. What do you think she meant? I asked as soon as we sat down. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began organizing copies of the files Claire had provided into separate evidence folders. Financial institutions, vendors, insurance, potential civil claims. He labeled each one carefully before looking up. I don't know exactly what she meant. But I know what concerns me. What? If your father represented you as someone standing behind Brandon's business to more than one party. He let the sentence hang. Well, then this isn't only about one fraudulent guarantee. It becomes a pattern. I felt a chill run through me. For years, I'd believed my family's biggest flaw was asking too much of me. Now I had to consider the possibility that someone had been using my reputation as an asset without my knowledge. Daniel reached for his phone. I'm filing 2 requests this afternoon. With the bank. One with the bank. And the other. Preservation notices. I frowned. Explain. If electronic records disappear after someone knows litigation is possible, courts tend to take that very seriously. So you're telling everyone not to delete anything. Exactly. He looked directly at me. Emails, text messages, internal notes, server logs, everything. What if they've already deleted something? Then we'll find out. For the first time since this began, I felt something replacing fear. Structure. Every step now had a purpose. Every document had a place. Every conversation could be verified. Daniel spent the next hour drafting formal legal notices. One went to the bank, another to Brandon's company, a third to the accounting firm that had prepared the refinancing documents. Each demanded that all records related to the loan be preserved pending investigation. This doesn't accuse anyone, Daniel explained. It simply tells them they have a legal duty not to destroy evidence. I nodded. And if they ignore it, that becomes its own problem. Before leaving, Olivia Bennett called. Rachel. Hi, Olivia. I wanted you to hear this directly from me. I'm listening. Our internal review has officially been upgraded. What does that mean? It means this is no longer being handled as a routine customer dispute. My heart skipped. So what is it now? Our fraud review team has opened a formal investigation. I looked at Daniel. He gave me a slight nod. Olivia continued, They'll be reviewing every communication associated with the loan. Will they contact me? Almost certainly. Should I do anything? Just continue working through your attorney. Her voice softened. I know this has been difficult. Thank you. I can't discuss details, but I can tell you something else. What? The additional documents your attorney requested. Yes. We found them. I held my breath. Are they the same as the copies my family showed me? No. The answer came so quickly that I almost missed it. No. They're significantly different. After the call ended, Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's interesting. What does it mean? It means someone didn't simply hand you incomplete paperwork. They handed you different paperwork. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Dad hadn't merely omitted pages. Someone had assembled an entirely different packet for me. one designed to make the transaction appear simple, one that never mentioned future liability, one that quietly guided me towards signing another acknowledgement. That wasn't confusion, that was presentation. Later that afternoon, my phone lit up with another call. Dad. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. Rachel. His voice sounded tired. I don't know who's filling your head with all this. But this has gone too far. People are starting to ask questions. I need you to stop talking to outsiders. This family can still fix this. I listened twice, then saved the recording. An hour later, Brandon texted, "Can we meet just us? No lawyers." I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another message appeared. Dad's under a lot of pressure. Then another. Mom hasn't been sleeping. Another. Please don't destroy this family. I stared at the screen. Not one message asked whether I was okay. Not one apologized. Not one denied that my signature had been used. Everything centered on protecting the family from consequences. Daniel looked over. Don't reply. I wasn't planning to. They're trying to move the conversation off the evidence. What do you mean? If you meet privately, there are no records, no witnesses, no documents. They're asking for emotion. You need procedure. I locked my phone. That evening, I opened my laptop to catch up on work I'd neglected. An email notification appeared before I even logged in. It wasn't from the bank. It wasn't from Daniel. It came from a commercial supplier I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Outstanding Balance, Duncan Premier Construction." I assumed it had been sent by mistake. Then I opened it. The first sentence made my stomach tighten. As previously discussed with your father, we understand you remain committed to ensuring payment of Brandon Duncan's account. I read it again, then a third time. My father, not Brandon. My father had apparently spoken to one of Brandon's vendors and assured them I would stand behind the debt. The email wasn't demanding payment. It was requesting an update because they believed I had already agreed. I immediately forwarded it to Daniel. He called within 2 minutes. Rachel, you saw it. I did. How bad is it? He was silent for a moment. Honestly, yes. It's also the strongest evidence we've received so far. I blinked. Why? Because this wasn't written for you. It was written by an independent third party. They had no reason to invent that statement. He continued, if multiple vendors were told the same story, then someone has been representing you as financially responsible outside the bank, and that creates an entirely new legal issue. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly realizing Claire had been right. The bank had never been the only audience. My name, my career, my reputation, they had become part of Brandon's business plan. Just before midnight, Olivia sent one final email. It contained only one sentence. Our investigators have identified the employee who processed the original guarantee, and she has agreed to provide a formal statement tomorrow morning. I woke up before my alarm. For the first time since that Sunday dinner, I wasn't lying awake because of fear. I was waiting. Somewhere across the city, the loan officer who had processed the guarantee was preparing to give a formal statement. If her account matched the documents Daniel had collected, months of speculation would finally become facts. At 9 o'clock, Daniel called. They've finished the interview, and I'm heading to the bank now. Can I come? You should. The fraud review team had reserved another conference room on the 4th floor. This time there were more people waiting. Olivia Bennett, Mark the compliance investigator, a woman from the bank's legal department, and a senior manager I hadn't met before. No one looked defensive. They looked exhausted. The senior manager began. Ms. Duncan, thank you for your patience throughout this process. I nodded but said nothing. We've completed the preliminary review of the loan file. He opened a binder. The employee who handled the guarantee is no longer with the bank. My stomach tightened. Did she admit what happened? She admitted several things. He turned a page. First, she confirmed she never met you in person. I wasn't surprised. Second, she relied on an existing customer profile associated with your name. The one containing my old phone number? Correct. He continued reading. Third, she accepted assurances from the borrower that all family approvals had already been obtained. Daniel spoke for the first time. Did she verify those approvals independently? No. Was that consistent with bank policy? The manager answered without hesitation. No. Silence settled over the room. The legal representative took over. We're not prepared to discuss employment matters involving former staff. However, she looked directly at me. Our review concluded that required verification procedures were not fully followed. Daniel nodded once. I appreciate your candor. The manager slid another document toward us. We've also reviewed the email correspondence your attorney provided. I recognized Claire's USB folders immediately. They've been very helpful. Helpful? That was an understatement. The internal emails established that multiple individuals believed you had not personally approved the guarantee. I looked at him. Multiple? Yes. Not just Brandon. He opened another section of the binder. We identified messages suggesting concerns were raised before the refinancing discussions. I leaned forward. By whom? The former loan officer questioned why communication with you had been unusually limited. What happened? She was told your father preferred to coordinate family financial matters himself. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Dad hadn't simply believed he was helping. He had inserted himself into conversations that should have belonged to me. The manager continued. We found no evidence that Mr. Thomas Duncan forged your signature. That didn't surprise me. I never believed he physically signed my name. No, but our review indicates he represented himself as speaking on your behalf. Daniel quietly wrote something in his notebook. The legal representative added carefully, whether those representations created legal liability outside the bank is a separate question. Exactly the question Daniel had been asking. When the meeting ended, Olivia asked if she could speak with me privately. We stepped into the hallway. I wanted to tell you something off the record. I smiled faintly. I thought bankers hated saying that. She laughed for the first time since we'd met. We do. Her expression quickly became serious again. I've worked commercial lending for almost 20 years. I've seen siblings guarantee loans. I've seen parents mortgage their homes. I've seen children rescue family businesses. But I've never seen someone remain as calm as you have. I haven't felt calm. I know. You've simply refused to let anger replace evidence. I thanked her. As Daniel and I walked toward the parking garage, he looked unusually optimistic. The bank's findings are stronger than I expected. They admitted procedures weren't followed. They confirmed your father spoke on your behalf. They confirmed employees knew you hadn't personally participated. So what happens now? They'll issue a formal determination. When? Very soon. My phone buzzed before we reached the car. Mom. This time I answered. Rachel. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Can we talk? We are talking. I mean, can you come over? Why, your father. She stopped. What about him? He's scared. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd been the one who felt guilty. Now, for the first time, Dad understood what uncertainty felt like. I'll come. An hour later, I walked into the same living room where all of this had begun. Only 3 people were there. Dad, Mom, me. Brandon wasn't around. Dad looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks earlier. He motioned toward the couch. I owe you an explanation. I remained standing. I'm listening. He rubbed his hands together before speaking. I never wanted your name on that guarantee. I didn't interrupt. I believed Brandon when he told me everything had already been approved. You believed him for months. I wanted to. That answer felt painfully honest. When did you realize something was wrong? He lowered his head. When you refused to sign those papers at my birthday dinner. So before that, I kept telling myself the bank wouldn't have processed everything if there were a problem. He looked at me with tired eyes. I chose the explanation that allowed me to sleep. Mom quietly wiped away tears, then she spoke. There is something I need to tell you, too. I turned toward her. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I knew Brandon still had your old phone years ago. I know. But... She hesitated. I also knew your father sometimes handled calls about Brandon's business because Brandon was always on job sites. I waited. There was one afternoon. She swallowed hard. When I heard your father telling someone... She stopped again. What did you hear? I heard him say, if you need Rachel, you can just contact me. The room went completely silent. Dad slowly closed his eyes. I shouldn't have said that. No, I replied quietly. You shouldn't have. Mom's confession didn't prove Dad had intended fraud, but it confirmed something equally important. He had crossed a line long before the guarantee ever appeared. He had grown so accustomed to speaking for me that he no longer recognized the difference between helping and replacing my voice. As I prepared to leave, my phone vibrated again. It was Olivia. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. The bank has reached its final decision. The official letter will be delivered tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I feared the bank's decision, because I knew that whatever arrived in tomorrow's envelope would change my family forever. For nearly 40 years, I'd measured my relationships by loyalty. Now everything seemed to revolve around accountability. The next morning, Daniel called before 9. The letter's here. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived at his office, the envelope was sitting unopened in the middle of the conference table. Daniel looked at me. I wanted you to open it. I took a slow breath, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. The first paragraph acknowledged the bank's investigation. The second summarized the evidence. The third contained the sentence that made me close my eyes for a moment. Following our internal review, the bank has determined that Rachel Duncan is not legally bound by the personal guarantee agreement in question due to material failures in the authentication and verification process. I read it again, then once more. Not legally bound. The words didn't erase the last several weeks, but they lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Daniel smiled. Congratulations. It doesn't feel like winning. It rarely does. He pointed to the remaining pages. Keep reading. The letter continued. The bank had voided the guarantee associated with my name. All collection activity connected to me had been permanently withdrawn. Every creditor who had been informed that I stood behind Brandon's debt would receive corrected information. The bank would also conduct additional reviews involving the commercial account. I looked up. So it's over. Daniel shook his head gently. It's over for you. What about Brandon? He still owes the money. And your father still has to live with the decisions he made. There wasn't any celebration. No cheering, no dramatic relief. Just quiet certainty. For the first time since that dinner, I knew exactly where I stood. An hour later, Olivia Bennett joined us by video call. I wanted to personally let you know the letters to outside parties have already begun going out. What kind of letters? Correction notices. She explained that vendors participating lenders and anyone who had received inaccurate information about my financial responsibility would now receive written clarification. No one should continue believing you're personally backing Mr. Duncan's company. I thanked her, then asked the question that had been bothering me for days. What happens to the former loan officer? I'm afraid I can't discuss personnel matters. I understand. But I can say this. Our investigation resulted in several procedural changes. I hope no one else has to go through what you did. After the call ended, Daniel handed me another folder. What's this? Everything you'll need if anyone ever questions what happened. Inside were certified copies of the investigation findings, correspondence preservation notices, and the timeline we'd built together. Months ago, I would have thought the stack looked excessive. Now it looked like peace of mind. As I slipped the folder into my bag, my phone rang. Brandon. For the first time since this started, I answered. Hello? He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice sounded nothing like the confident man from that Sunday dinner. They voided it. Yes? I just got the notice. I assumed you would. Silence. Then he asked quietly, Can we talk? We're talking. I mean, in person. Why, I owe you the truth. I considered hanging up. Instead, I said, 1 hour. We met at a public park halfway between our neighborhoods. No restaurants, no family homes, no audience. Just 2 benches overlooking a pond. Brandon arrived looking exhausted. His beard had grown in unevenly. His shoulders sagged beneath a wrinkled jacket. For the first time in years, he looked less like my older brother and more like someone who had been running from himself. He sat across from me. I've rehearsed this conversation all morning. Then start. He stared at the water. When you paid my debt 4 years ago. It wasn't supposed to become a habit. I know. I really believed I'd recover. I landed another contract. I thought I'd pay everyone back. What happened? I kept borrowing to cover the last loan. I nodded. I've seen businesses collapse that way. I kept telling myself one more project would fix everything. Did it? No. He laughed bitterly. It only made the numbers bigger. I waited. The first time you helped me. He looked directly at me. I stopped seeing your help as a gift. I felt my chest tighten. I started seeing it as a backup plan. There it was. Not greed. Not hatred. Entitlement built one rescue at a time. I never planned to hurt you. I believe that. But you still did. He nodded. I kept thinking Dad could convince you. He always had before. His honesty hurt more than another lie would have. Did you forge my signature? He lowered his head. I started the process. My heartbeat slowed. The electronic documents? I knew the old phone number. I knew Dad still handled some conversations. I convinced myself. He stopped. What? That once everything was finished. You'd rather help than send me to court. I looked at him for a long time. You expected me to accept what had already been done. Yes, because that's what I'd always done before. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize how much I'd come to depend on that. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, he asked, Can you forgive me? I answered honestly. I can let go of carrying this every day. He nodded slowly. But forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. I know. I won't pay another $1 toward your business. I understand. I won't sign anything. I understand. And from now on, I paused. Every financial conversation between us happens in writing. He gave a small defeated smile. That sounds like you. It does. As we stood to leave, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a folded envelope. "What's this?" "A copy of a letter." I unfolded it. It was addressed to every one of his major suppliers. In it, Brandon acknowledged that I had never authorized him to represent me as a guarantor and accepted sole responsibility for his company's obligations. He had already signed it.
"I should have done this weeks ago,"
he said.
"Yes. I was embarrassed. I know."
As he walked away, I realized something surprising. The investigation hadn't changed my brother. Consequences had. That afternoon, as I drove back toward my office, my phone buzzed with a text from my father.
"Rachel,
I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing, I'd like to see you one last time. Not to ask for money, just to tell you something I should have said years ago." I looked at the message for a long moment before locking my phone. For weeks, every conversation had been about debt. Tomorrow, for the first time, it would be about something far more difficult: responsibility. I didn't answer my father's text that evening, not because I wanted to punish him. I simply needed one night without another difficult conversation. For weeks, every phone call had carried another revelation, another document, another decision. I wanted one evening where no one needed anything from me. I cooked dinner, watered the plants on my apartment balcony, read half a novel without remembering a single page. The next morning I texted Dad, "I can meet for coffee at 10, 1 hour." He replied almost immediately, "Thank you." We met at a quiet cafe near Lake Michigan. Not my favorite place, not his. Neutral ground. When I arrived, he was already there. No folder, no paperwork, no leather briefcase. Just a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. For the first time in my life, my father looked uncertain before speaking to me.
"I've been trying to figure out where I lost you."
I pulled out my chair. "You didn't lose me." He frowned.
"You stopped listening to me. I stopped confusing obedience with love."
He lowered his eyes.
"I suppose I earned that."
Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Finally, he looked at me again.
"I kept thinking I was protecting Brandon." "I know. I told myself he'd get back on his feet."
"I know. I convinced myself that once his business recovered, everything would balance out." He smiled sadly. "But every time things got worse, I asked the wrong child to carry the weight." I let those words settle between us. I didn't wake up one morning deciding Rachel should sacrifice everything. It happened one decision at a time. He was right. It had started with small requests. Could you help with one payment? Could you cover 1 month? Could you loan him a little more? Could you not make this a big deal? Each request sounded temporary. Each promise sounded reasonable. Until one day, $30,000 was announced at dinner as though my consent no longer mattered. Dad folded his hands.
"I owe you something I never gave you."
I waited. Respect. The word surprised me.
"I always respected your work." "No."
He shook his head.
"I admired your success."
"That's different." "I admired what you could provide."
"I didn't respect your right to decide."
For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had stayed with me since everything began. "When did you stop asking me?" He answered without hesitation. "The first time you said yes." I nodded slowly. "I thought I was helping."
"I know.
But every time I rescued Brandon,
it became easier for everyone to assume I always would."
He looked genuinely ashamed.
"I didn't see that. I believe you. And that's what hurts the most."
He blinked.
"What do you mean?"
"I don't think you were trying to ruin my life. I think you slowly convinced yourself my life belonged to the family." His eyes filled with tears.
"I did."
He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply admitted it. that mattered more than any dramatic apology ever could. When the check arrived, Dad reached for it automatically. Then he stopped. He looked at me.
I almost did it again.
What? Assumed. I smiled for the first time that morning.
I noticed.
He laughed quietly.
So did I.
He paid for his own coffee. I paid for mine. It was a tiny moment. Most people wouldn't have thought twice about it. But to me it symbolized something important. Neither of us owed the other. Not financially, not emotionally. We were simply two adults making our own choices. Over the following months, life became surprisingly peaceful. The bank formally closed its investigation. The fraudulent guarantee remained permanently void. Brandon entered negotiations with his creditors and eventually sold several company vehicles to reduce his debt. His construction business survived, but on a much smaller scale. For the first time, it operated within limits he could actually manage. Claire filed for legal separation several weeks later. She told me it wasn't because of one loan. It was because she no longer recognized the man who kept justifying dishonesty as temporary. We stayed in touch, not because we had once been sisters-in-law, because we'd both learned how exhausting it was to carry someone else's decisions. Daniel and I celebrated the end of the case with lunch instead of champagne. That felt more appropriate.
I've been thinking, he said. About what?
The first day you walked into my office, I was terrified.
You were.
But you never asked me how to make your family lose. I looked at him.
You only asked how to find the truth.
I smiled.
I guess I did.
That's why this ended differently. He was right. I never wanted revenge. I wanted reality. There is a difference. About a year after that unforgettable dinner, my parents invited me to Thanksgiving. Not because they expected me to pay for anything, not because Brandon needed rescuing. Simply because they hoped I'd come. I accepted. Before dinner, Dad quietly pulled me aside. I want you to know something. I waited. If Brandon ever asks me to pressure you again, he smiled gently.
My answer is no.
I believed him. Not because he promised, because he'd changed the way he acted. That mattered far more than words. Today, my relationship with my family looks different than it once did. I love them. I answer their calls. I celebrate birthdays. I visit on holidays. But I don't rescue grown adults from choices they refuse to own. Money no longer decides whether I'm a good daughter. Guilt no longer decides whether I say yes. And peace no longer depends on keeping everyone else comfortable. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't how to detect fraud. It was recognizing that healthy boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal whether relationships were built on love or on access. Sometimes the hardest part of being taken advantage of by family isn't losing money. It's realizing that the people you trusted slowly came to believe your kindness belonged to them. Many of us are raised to think that love means sacrifice without limits, especially when parents or siblings say, family takes care of family. But healthy love has room for consent, honesty, and respect. Without those, sacrifice quietly becomes expectation, and expectation can become entitlement. Setting boundaries is not the same as seeking revenge. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Boundaries are about deciding what access other people have to your time, your finances, your peace, and your future. You can forgive someone and still choose not to lend them money again. You can wish them well without becoming responsible for the consequences of their decisions. Those choices are not cruel. They are often the healthiest way to preserve both your dignity and whatever relationship can still be saved. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for saying no to family, I hope Rachel's journey reminds you that protecting yourself does not mean you love your family less. It means you finally learned to love yourself enough to require honesty and mutual respect. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? How did it change your relationship? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who feels alone. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family justice, healing, and finding strength through wisdom rather than revenge, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and joined us for the next journey. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.